Okay, so this is a quote from Joel Pomack in a National Geographic article that's titled "Evolution and Science Can Coexist, Scientists Say." And this quote says, "In the last few years, astronomy has come together so that now we're able to tell a coherent story of how the universe began. This story doesn't contradict God, but instead encourages the idea of God." So I've always been so intrigued by space ever since I can remember. I loved looking at the stars and I could just get so lost in them. I'd be stressed out and I could look at the sky and immediately feel a lot more peaceful. And my passion for astronomy started when I saw a documentary from National Geographic, and it talked all about the Milky Way and all of the phenomena that go on inside. And I don't know if you know this, but most National Geographic scientists are agnostic or atheists, or at least define themselves along those lines. But at the end of watching that documentary made by agnostic people, I sat there and I was like, how do they learn about this and not think that there's a God? Because to me it just screams for a designer. So I was utterly confused. So I talk about this because one of the most popular controversies in the scientific world today is the existence of black holes. This is not an actual black hole because it's still a theory, but this is an artist's rendition of a black hole. Stephen Hawking says the absence of event horizons mean that there are no black holes, and the sense of regimes from which light can escape to infinity. So Stephen Hawking is basically saying black holes can't exist because there's not a place for them to exist in the universe. So I talk about this because scientists, even if they're agnostic or Christian, they have different views. Sometimes they can agree and say black holes do exist, or sometimes black holes don't exist. So to give you a little bit into this scientific controversy, black holes are a gap in the space-time curvature, which means that basically they're a wormhole of sorts. And they have a gravitational pull that's so strong that neither light nor sound can escape it. And a little interesting fact that you might like is something called spaghettification that goes on inside a black hole whenever something of density and matter enters it. So basically whatever's in there gets pulled and stretched out into like a noodle. Fun, right? But so how are black holes formed? In theory, how are they formed? Well, according to D. Kosis and A. Lieb in menus for feeding black holes, they are supposedly created by these. They're called supernovas. And this is actually a supernova 1987A on the edge of the Tarantula Nebula. And as you can see, the star is exploding, and that is what a supernova is basically the star just exploding because it got too heavy. But however, a supernova can form into three things. It can form into neutron stars, a nebula, which is this, or it can turn into a black hole. Now, why am I telling you all about black holes, and what does this have to do with science and Christianity going hand in hand? Well, as Christians, we shouldn't be afraid to get into controversies like the existence of black holes. We should be able to make an academic stance with scholarly and tangible proof and say why we believe this or why we don't believe this. It's okay to use the Bible for some things, but the Bible is not a scientific textbook. Because when we use the Bible, sometimes we get caught up into a circular logical fallacy, like we learned about. And sometimes we will find data that's not addressed in the Bible. And that doesn't make it true, but it doesn't make it not true either. For example, in between the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible, there are about 400 years during which that was the time where God was silent to the Hebrew people. Just because it's in the Bible, does that mean that those Hebrews didn't live and die and have kids during those 400 years? No, of course not. They still lived and they still thrived. It just wasn't in the Bible. So does that mean that some scientific evidence, just because it's not in the Bible, isn't there? No, it can be still proven. Instead of supporting the God of the gap theory, I am more of a science of the gap theory. That's not an actual theory, it's just a little play on words I made. So I say that whatever the Bible doesn't talk about, science can fill in the gaps. And it should fit like a puzzle. Only if that science is true and proven, it should fit. So I have this saying that says, science and God don't disagree, the people who study them don't disagree. And this is also proven by an excerpt in The Christians in Science, Looking Back and Looking Forward. This is a very interesting article. I would advise you to look it up. It's written by Malcolm Jeeves and Sam Berry, and it talks about many different religious scientists. And one of them that stuck out to me was named Robert Boyle, and he was a 17th century chemist. And he says this, he says, he firmly believed that a proper view of divine action in creation need not distinguish between the laws of nature and the work of God. Science and Christianity are viewed as polar opposites. They're almost viewed as enemies. But just like Robert Boyle said, that's not how it should be. What if science and religion were partners? What if for every step for science was a step for God? There are so many famous examples of these two working hand in hand, such as Galileo, Sir Isaac Newton, Joel Primack, and Robert Boyle even. So like I said, science and God don't disagree. The people who study them disagree. I believe that partly why Christians and scientists don't get along is because of ignorance. The Christians are scared of what we might find through scientific discovery, that it actually might have something that disproves something in the Bible. But if we do that, we can miss out on some really cool stuff. We can miss out on learning about black holes and learning about space, and we can miss out learning about God and His creation. Because how do you get to know an artist? Usually through his art. You look at his artwork. It's the same thing with God. How do you get to know a creator? You look at his creation. So science and religion do go hand in hand. This fear to not learn about things in science and this ignorance gives Christianity a bad rep in the science world. But if we accepted new data and challenged it and tried out new theories and actually strive for new evidence and not just held up the Bible as our only proof, but actually got some tangible scientific evidence, then we could actually no longer be labeled as ignorant. As a servant speaker, we should talk about things that are relevant to the audience. And an audience doesn't have to be a group of people just like this. It can be a conversation that you're having with, say, another scientist. So would an atheistic scientist, if you were trying to prove the existence of black holes and you just said, oh, because God made them, so they're real, do you think he would believe that? No, of course not. You have to put it in terms that he would believe. You have to do some research on it. You have to use scientific evidence and actually present a case to them. If you approach the topic as they would, you will have a much more receiving audience. And this is a quote from the scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson in an interview by Roger Bingham on the Science Network, and he says this: "The most important feature is the analysis of the information that comes your way. And that's what I don't see enough of in this world. There's a level of gullibility that leaves people susceptible to being taken advantage of. I see science literacy as kind of a vaccine against charlatans who would try to exploit your ignorance." Interesting fact, Tyson actually identifies as agnostic, but I can take a Christian view on this, because without our science literacy, we can be pointed out as ignorant. And that gives a bad rep for us and people who actually are very smart Christians and scientific. They look at you and they make a generalization about you. Other Christians are ignorant, so you must be too. And that's not what we want. Now, you've seen this picture before as my first slide, and there's a reason why I brought it up. The cross not only symbolizes Jesus' death for us, but also the harmony between God and nature. The cross is made out of a tree. And tree is nature, and nature is the world around us. Science studies the world around us. And then God sent his son, and he died on this cross to show us his love for us. And there's a reason that the two work in harmony. They shouldn't be two separate topics. They should be two topics that build off of each other. And from this, you can do, if you combine religion with any subject, anything and everything you do, from science to art to even dentistry, and you glorify God and remember that everything can work together for God's good, you won't be ignorant in your subject. You'll actually excel and you'll succeed. I'm going to leave up with a quote from Dr. Marcus Blights, who's actually another famous Christian astrophysicist, and he says, "Study science to be able to better serve God." And I think this is exactly what he wants every one of us to do, to use the gifts we got from him and use them for him, to the glory of him and his son, Jesus Christ.